Good evening, everyone. We will start in just 5 minutes. Thank you. Good evening, friends. On behalf of Vibrant HR and the Success Mantra, I, Shankar Salunke, would like to welcome you all for today's wonderful session. Friends, today we are blessed with such a wonderful speaker and personality, Captain Raghu Raman. On behalf of Vibrant HR and Success Mantra, I would like to convey my sincere thanks to him and his entire team, and special thanks to Shadul, who was instrumental in coordinating to this webinar. Without taking much time, I would like to request Akanksha to give a brief introduction of today's honorable speaker. Akanksha, over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Vibrant HR Professional Association, I, Akansha Singh, welcome you all in one more knowledge sharing session, which will be addressed by Captain Raghu Raman, a strategic coach, author, and the former CEO of the National Intelligence Grid. He has a unique blend of career experiences. He began his career with the Indian Armed Forces. During his 12-year stint there, he was in operations in Punjab, then in the front line at the highest battlefield in the world in Siachen Glacier, followed by a tour of duty in Wormtongue, Angola as a UN peacekeeper. His last stint with the army was as an instructor in prestigious School of Armored Warfare, teaching young officers leadership and combat tactics. During his tenure in the army, he underwent over 7 training courses, including weapons, armaments, missiles, tactics, commandos, and computers, attaining the highest gradings. In 1998, he left the Indian Army and joined the Mahindra Group, where he worked and led different companies, starting with the United World Colleges, then as the CEO of First Choice, CEO of Mahindra SSG, and finally as the CEO of the joint venture between BAE and Mahindra. In 2009, he was handpicked to create and lead the National Intelligence Grid, an ambitious project set up post the 26/11 attacks in Mumbai by the Home Ministry of Indian government. He also teaches leadership, analytics, strategy, and communication in leading business schools and institutions and is a member of Outstanding Speaker Bureau. He has operated in distinctively different environments of leadership: the authority style within the armed forces, an incentive driven style predominant in corporates such as Mahindra and Reliance, and the procedure driven bureaucratic style in government. He has founded and led companies as well as global joint ventures. He has also raised a new hybrid organization with government personal and which has personnel from government and private sector working together towards a common mission. Captain Raghu Raman has a strong presence in leading publications and platforms like TEDx and Josh, as well as media, namely Hindustan Times, Mint, People Matters, Wired, and Indian Express. He is the author of a book on national security published by Penguin titled Every Man's War, which has been acknowledged as seminal work on the subject. His leadership talks have watched over 10 million times and is used in several leadership forums as case studies. We are really very honored to have you amongst us today. I now humbly request you, sir, to please take over the session and give us deeper insights and learnings so that we can transform into great leaders of tomorrow. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Akanksha. That was a wonderful introduction. Thank you very much for your kind words, and thank you to everybody who's attending this. I can see on Zoom itself, there's almost about 75 odd people, and I'm assuming there'll be some in Facebook as well. So firstly, thanks a ton for taking out the time on a Friday evening for yet another knowledge session. I think we have been having death by webinar over the last 5 or 6 months, and every time I open my WhatsApp or any other message, there is somebody else who is willing to share knowledge and give more gyan. So I actually don't have any presentation or a session today with you, but I think what I wanted to share with you was a conversation that I had with a group of HR people, HR professionals at a senior level, at a strategic level, a couple of weeks back. This was a group of about 20 odd I would say CHROs who are responsible for some of the largest organizations in India and perhaps also in the world. In terms of, so this was a discussion where I was asked to speak about how organizations need to be dealt with when they are going through a crisis, which is what most organizations are going to go through. If they are not already going through, they will be going through very shortly. So organizational behavior, people's behavior during a crisis changes, as you're all aware, as we are all aware. I think all of us have studied, all HR professionals would have definitely studied the Maslow's pyramid, in which Abraham Maslow explained that in the hierarchy of needs, at the lowest level, all human beings have a need of just physical security and physical safety and food and the very basic elements which animals also require. We also require that. And then the next layer comes, which is much more about the society and my prestige in the society, self-esteem, giving back to the society, and all of those layers come much later. They come when individuals are in a state of security. They are psychologically safe. When they are safe, those layers have some meaning. But in the absence of basic psychological safety, most human beings will go back straight to the lowest level of the pyramid. And that's very obvious if you saw the behavior of many people during the beginning of the lockdown, of hoarding food, hoarding sanitizers and toilet paper in some cases. This is a very basic human behavior that whenever human beings are afraid, they will default to the reptilian brain, or rather the lowest form of survival, which is basically survival of self in the physical sense. Now, for organizations to be able to expect that when they come out of the crisis, they will be able to come out of the crisis with people who are scared, people who are afraid, people who are not sure about their level of security. And I know that Pune is a hub for many IT firms and many knowledge workers. And in that space, we know that there is going to be some churn that will happen. So in an environment where employees are psychologically afraid, insecure, to expect that many of these mantras that we give them about morale and votation and we have to fight back and all for one for all of these nice sayings which are put up on boards of organizations, they don't have much resonance. They will not have much resonance to people. It's imagine like one day if you come to work, I'm sure it must have happened to you sometime or the other in your life where you slept the wrong way and you sprained your neck or you had a bad neck pain. Through the day when you had to go through, if you woke up with 100 ounces of energy, about 60-70 ounces of energy just went in handling this, just looking in terms of this pain, just managing this pain. That was a simple physical pain. Now imagine a psychological fear that I may lose my job. How will I pay my EMI? My children are studying in so-and-so school. How will I manage their tuitions? All of these fears, if people have, it's very unlikely that that organization will be able to implement any strategy, no matter how great that strategy is. Because at the end of the day, the strategy has to be implemented by human beings, not by platforms, not by automatons, not by robots. So I actually, as some of you might be aware, and those of you who heard the introduction might have perhaps grasped, I've spent about 4 decades now in the field of risk and security, and I've also been a CEO of some startups and 1 or 2 turnarounds. And by and large, the principles of leadership that are required during a crisis, of course, we're all learning, I'm also learning that, you'll find that those principles hinge around the first hope of optimism that the team must have. The team must have a sense of optimism. कि ये कर जाएगा, हो जाएगा. We'll figure a way out of this. This is something that we can make it happen. Now, unless that environment exists, it will be very difficult for organizations to deal with the crisis that we are facing. And much of my discussion was based on that. And this was not some, so basically what happened is about 2 months ago, I was asked to write a paper for a particular body, and in which we were to look at what kind of leadership changes would be required in organizations, what kind of leadership styles would need to change in organizations. And when I was, that paper was written, and then an abstract of that paper was published in Hindustan Times. It came out, I'll see if I can send that link to you. It came out, I think, about a week or 10 days back. And whatever I'm going to share with you is more based around that paper and the findings, or rather the conclusions of that. So it begins with an understanding that Gallup conducted a survey in 2011. This was a global survey. More than 142 countries took part in it. Thousands and thousands of companies took part. And the results were quite startling, because Gallup estimated that less than 20% of employees are engaged in the workplace. Close to about 60% are neutral. They don't have a view one way or the other. They come to work, they clock their hours, they catch their bus, they go back home. And about close to 20% are actively sabotaging the organization for whatever reason. They may have been disgruntled, they may feel that they don't have a sense of purpose, or sometimes people are just like that they'd like to. Now, it's an interesting statistic. Of course, this has been augmented with several other studies later on. And I think intuitively all HR professionals know this. They know this deep down in their heart, that if they took 100 people in a company, again, this is not company to company, I'm sure the figures vary, but by and large, the number of people who are either neutral or disengaged outnumber the people who are passionately engaged. And this is a fact for most organizations. Now, this was the situation well before COVID. The second part, again, this is a statistic that is very well known, though it's not talked about, and many organizations, many families don't talk about it, is that 1 in 6 Indians suffers from some form of mental stress. It could be mental stress, it could be mental health, it could be a mental condition. So if you put both these two facts together, then corporate India was not very efficient to begin with. It was not that before COVID, corporate India was extremely efficient. Organizations were vibrant. They were, pumping on all cylinders. That wasn't the truth. I know it, you know it, and I have been to sufficient number of organizations and seen sufficient number of organizations as a fly on the wall, especially when I'm called in for interventions, to know that the number of organizations who need or who we assume will be doing very well aren't that many when it comes to organizational culture and vibrance. And we will come to that as to why that kind of happens. Now, traditionally, many elements such as diversity, work-life balance, these are all, nice to have phrases. Matter of fact, whenever I have asked some of my friends who are heading major companies that what have they done about work-life balance and diversity, they say we have hired a person from, and usually they'll name an MNC. They'll say we have hired this person, last year, and we have brought usually a her. Brought this person, and they're in their head hiring that person and bringing that person in is the first major checklist, that ye to humne kar diya, as if that is a major achievement that they've done. But while they'll give lip service to it, traditionally in Indian corporates, we have always created a dog-eat-dog kind of a culture. We have made the North Zone head and the East Zone head. There is a competition every quarter between the different zones, and then the winner is, and the star employees, the Golden Club, the top 1%. We've constantly pitted one part of the organization against the other part. We've encouraged sort of a fratricide within the organization for 364 days in a year. And one day in a year, we take them in an offsite and call some motivational speaker and tell them to collaborate. It doesn't work that way, because traditionally in our environment, it has been a very competitive environment, not just in corporate. Starts from school. Starts from the school, the number of seats that are available for science, number of seats available, the cutoff that goes in astronomical percentages. So it's always more contenders fighting for that less resource, which is kind of the DNA of thinking, and therefore also translating into the corporate management style. But in a crisis, this management style usually does not work very well. And I explained earlier also that when people are frightened, when people are scared, then scaring them with loss of job or loss of compensation or loss of variable pay is not really likely to drive them more. It'll scare them more. And of course, you can scare a person by announcing that, headquarters has ordered that we have to optimize our headcount, and automatically that'll drive shivers into people's, especially those people who are vulnerable from their financial status. Not necessarily inefficient, they may be efficient, but their sense of worry will be exacerbated because they will have commitments of EMIs to pay and all of that. That will be the kind of environment. But in a crisis, it is the exact opposite that is required. Because let's look at the fundamentals. Suppose we are facing a crisis, any crisis that we are facing. And usually crises, what are crises? Crises are unprecedented situations. If it is a precedented situation, it will not be so much of a crisis because people would have gone through it. There will be an SOP for a downturn. There will be an SOP for a product recall. There'll be an SOP for any of the events that have occurred in the past. There'll be a general SOP. Even if a headcount reduction, I think most of the IT HR professionals will remember 2008, you'll remember 2001, 2002, and there were two major sort of retrenchments that happened in the IT industry. So crises that have happened in the past, there is some sort of an understanding and an SOP, but a crisis like this, which has never happened in the past, people will have to deal with and create new answers to it. But to be able to create a plan, any leader or any leadership layer first needs to have a very accurate picture of what is going on. Without that accurate picture, it's like a diagnosis. No doctor, the best doctor in the world, cannot cure a patient unless and until the doctor has a very good diagnosis of what is wrong with the patient. So if the strategic layer of an organization, CXO layer, presidents, whatever you want to call it, if they need to be able to formulate a good plan to steer the organization out of this crisis environment or crisis times, then they need to have a very good understanding of what is really happening on ground. What is the ground situation? But leaders who have created an environment of fear, who have created an environment of intimidation, who have created an environment of, if you don't do this, this is what will happen to you. Which is, by the way most organizations willy-nilly administer themselves. That's why Interestingly, organizations will measure your physical presence in the office complex. What time you logged in, biometric, this, that, all of those data. But there is really no measurement of your mental engagement in the organization. So if a person has physically entered into the premises and logged in and logged into the terminal, by and large, the overall mechanism seems to be happy that we got 8 hours of the person's physical presence over here. Whether the mental engagement was there or not, that is not even measured, hardly measured. So the first is that for the leaders to have an accurate picture, they must have people who have the ability to tell them the truth, to tell them actually this is what is happening in the real world. Now, I'm sure many of you might have heard of this very famous experiment called the Marshmallow Tower experiment. Those of you haven't, just Google it. It'll be quite an education. It's quite an interesting experiment. You can do it with your own teams in your companies. So the experiment goes something like this: that the team of about 8 to 10 people in one group, they are given 20 sticks of spaghetti. Or I normally use jhadu ka tilli, broom, the tilli, and a piece of thermocol. The original experiment was done with marshmallow. You can do it with a piece of thermocol and some duct tape. The idea is to try and construct a tower which is as high as possible within 18 minutes using these 3 things. That is, some sticks, some duct tape, and a piece of marshmallow. And this experiment has been tried with various different demographies. It's been tried with MBAs, graduates, engineers, lawyers, architects, CEOs, CFOs, HR professionals, kindergarten kids. It's been tried across with various different groups. And the worst performers, ironically, are the management trainees and MBA management trainees. And we'll come to why that happens. The second best performers are the architects and the engineers. Thank God for that, because they're the ones who build our buildings and towers and all of that stuff. But the ones who beat all the other groups, hands down, as you might have probably guessed correctly, are the kindergarten kids. Now, the reason why this happens is actually a study in human behavior, organizational behavior. So what happens typically is when a group is given a task, and I'm sure we've all participated in this group task, whether in college or later on in workplaces also, when these interventionists come from outside and do these, team building exercises. So what happens is the task is given and the 5-6 people will immediately distribute themselves, and somebody will take on the role of, we will discuss how the tower will be made, and someone will say, "Main to pehle construction mein kaam karta tha. I was part of Kalpataru, so I'll know more about it." All of this bullshit will happen. So people will basically do what is called status management. They will try to manage their status within that group. Kindergarten kids don't give a flying fish about status. They'll push each other. When somebody has an idea, they will go and implement it. Someone needs a piece of thermocol, they will just take it. They will be task oriented. They will be oriented towards a task of getting the tower built as high as possible. They will not look and see what will the CEO say if I say this. So the first and the most important ingredient for any CXO level leadership to be able to formulate a way out of this storm is to have an accurate picture, and they cannot have an accurate picture unless the environment is psychologically safe, unless people feel the courage to voice out what is in their heart or what they have seen in the marketplace. Matter of fact, I still remember an incident which I quote about very often, is that when we were in the early stages of designing NatGrid in 2008, 2009, it was the younger lot who understood the importance of privacy. People of my generation of leaders, we knew, yes, privacy is important or not, but we didn't realize how important it was going to be and how much an element of privacy could make or break an institution's capability to work. So their ability to keep the eye on the horizon, over the horizon, especially remember this, that most of our customers, regardless of which business we are in, which work we do, what kind of companies we run, most of our customers and most of our employees are going to be young. And it is very important, therefore, that we have representatives of that demography, which constitutes not just our clients, but also our workforce, to be the ones to be able to give us that input. And that input will only come in an environment where people feel free to speak and they are not afraid. So that is the first reason why a psychologically safe environment is existential. The second reason is when plans are being made during a crisis, we need to take as much of participative collaboration of the people themselves, those who are going to execute the plan. That's the basic fundamental. If you involve as many people as possible who have to implement and execute the plan, chances are not only will the plan be better designed, you will get tribal knowledge into it, you will get information nuggets which are hidden in the bureaucratic layers of the organization, inside the heads of some people, tribal memory, as they call it, of an organization. You will get access to all of that, and people will participate to develop a purpose-driven plan, which takes the entire organization forward. But in an environment of fear and intimidation, people will look after their turfs. They will first look after their job. They will look after their division, their department. They will fight to prevent any sort of a job cut happening from their own department, their own, sort of coterie. And that is also one of the big downsides of having an environment where people are insecure, or people feel unsafe, or they feel threatened. So the plan which is built by a team that is psychologically safe is much more likely to be a plan which looks at the organizational wellness than a team which is psychologically afraid, because that team's plan will be basically first to safeguard their own entities, their own jobs, their own kingdoms, their own satrapis. They will safeguard that first and worry about the organization's success in a second priority. The third aspect, which is about execution. So now we have made a plan and now you need to execute it. But one of the things in a crisis situation is that execution has to be extremely flexible. And the reason, just give me a sec, 1 second. I've got a dog here inside my room who needs to go out. The advantages of working from home. You got participation of your pets and your kids and all of that. So I'm sorry. So the third aspect is about the execution. And for execution to happen, you need frontline leaders to have a fair degree of empowerment in terms of their ability to take decisions on the spot. Why? Because the situation is very, very volatile. Now, if it was a tried and tested situation where SOPs work, then you could say, okay, if this happens, you do this. If this happens, you do this. But in an unknown situation, in an unknown, customer behaviors are changing. For example, people thought that after COVID, capex purchases of certain items will not happen because people will not spend money. But we are seeing a lot of people are buying small cars. And the reason why they're buying small cars is because they were completely stranded when the lockdown happened and they didn't have Ola or Uber, and they suddenly realized that they need their own integral transportation if they have to take some sick parent to the hospital. So people who would have otherwise not bought a car and would have been happy with shared services are now buying a car. So customer behavior is changing. So in that changing customer behavior, frontline leaders need to have a high degree of empowerment, and a high degree of empowerment and flexibility will only happen in an environment where people feel secure. Because if people don't feel secure, then there will be fear of failure in every action that they do, instead of having hope for success. Instead of having hope for success, they will have fear of failure. So we see that basically, whether it is in terms of designing a plan, whether it's in terms of implementing it, or whether it's in terms of actually carrying the organization with it during these times of crisis, we need to have a psychologically safe environment where people feel safe. Now, that's a very difficult thing to do, especially for an HR, which has probably been given instructions that you start making optimization Excel sheets, which essentially means that every department will be told that you have to cut off the flab and cut off every excess person, try and outsource every activity which is not core, try and cut down costs. So to my mind, this what is happening right now is not a revival plan. What is happening right now is a survival plan where people are looking to cut as much of jobs as possible or as much of headcount as possible in most organizations. And in that environment, to create a sense of psychological safety requires the CHRO or the HR fraternity to really understand that if they do not create a psychologically safe environment, then more fear being driven into the organization is actually going to create a double impact. I'll explain that to you. I'll explain to you. Forget about COVID, forget about these times. I just want to talk about two industries. One industry where people accept that people can make mistakes, employees can make mistakes, senior people can make mistakes, juniors can make mistakes. And what happens in that industry vis-a-vis another industry where it is almost an anathema to accept mistakes, where it is like, if you make a mistake, you're weak. If you don't know something, then you're a bad leader. Ignorance of any form is supposed to be equated to inefficiency. And therefore, declaring that you don't know something or admitting that you don't know something is supposed to be sacrilege. And see what happens in these two industries. So let's take the aviation industry, for example. I don't know how many of you know this, but in the aviation industry, there is a concept called filing of near miss reports, near misses. So it basically means pilots, people who are operating ATC, anybody, they can voluntarily file a near miss report, which says that on so-and-so date, so-and-so place, this happened and it was a near miss. We almost had an accident. Thousands of such near miss reports are filed every year by the aviation industry, which makes the aviation industry learn from their mistakes, from somebody else's mistake, and from somebody else's near mistake, near disaster, and make their processes and performances better. Matter of fact, the story actually is far deeper, and I think from an organizational design point of view, some of you might be interested in this story, that when the DC-10, I think it was the DC-10 aircraft, which was introduced in the US, it had a disproportionate number of crashes. What was found, they tried to figure out, and of course they brought the subject matter experts, and the subject matter experts studied it, but they were not able to figure out why it was happening. And they actually brought in a professor from one of the Ivy League colleges to take a look at this problem. That professor found something very interesting, because obviously he looked at it from a very different viewpoint. He found that in the controls of the DC-10, the flap down and the wings down were two knobs that were placed right next to each other. So there was really no way that these two knobs were different from each other. So much so that in a panic, it was quite possible that a pilot who intended to put one knob down might put the other knob down, and which is exactly what was happening during the landing time. And so two things happened because of that result of the study. One was an element that we are all familiar with nowadays. It's got a word for it also, was introduced at that point of time, because what they did was on the top of both of these knobs, they put a design which illustrated even by touch what that knob was for. So it was a wheels down had a wheel on it, and a flap down had a flap on it. And that was the origin of the word ergonomics. That's where ergonomics actually came into the design. And secondly, a culture was started that when we don't understand a problem, let's bring in somebody who's got a completely fresh perspective and not have the ego to say, "Ye kya janta hai jahazon ke bare mein? Professor kya batayega humko?" Not to have that kind of an attitude, but to have an attitude which says that this person who comes in from outside might be able to give us a perspective that we might not get from inside. And that has a sense of humility to it. I think a very illustrative point which illustrates this is to realize that the airline industry is possibly the only industry where the manufacturer of the aircraft concedes that my plane might crash. And that is why they fit a black box into it. So they fit a black box saying that even if the plane crashes, we will learn from that crash and we'll improve our next design. And that, to my mind, brings a sense of humility and an environment of psychological safety where people feel it's okay to say that I'm not okay with this, or I'm scared, or I don't know what's going on, or can you explain this to me better, or I think there is a better way to do this, or I think what you're talking is complete nonsense. The ability to have that environment. Let's take another environment, which is the, let's say, medical industry. Now, in the medical industry also, there are many situations where a nurse has to dash into a cupboard and pick out a medicine amongst many bottles and administer a particular injection. All the bottles look alike. But if a mishap happens in an operating theater, it's never the operating doctors and the patient nurses and their fault, because every operation has a success and a failure chance. And if it fails, it is always put down to that failure chance. There is very, very little introspection that happens in that industry about what went wrong, because of course the prima donnas can't be wrong. People who are surgeons who have waiting list of months before they'll operate on their patient, they cannot be wrong. And because they cannot be wrong, the medical industry actually globally kills several 100,000 people every year because of faulty administration of drugs, because of the wrong diagnosis, because of the wrong medicine being injected, in some cases the wrong part being operated out. So it's a great example to see how, if an organization creates an environment of psychological safety, that organization actually becomes much more stronger. It becomes much more resilient. We can know that in our own families, families which have had a very, very alpha, sometimes male, sometimes female, dominant parent on whose arrival everyone became quiet and everyone hid stuff from them, or had to operate in an environment of fear. Those families rarely have the kind of resilience and the kind of vibrance than families where there is much more communication, there is much more vulnerability that is shared. So this is the importance, of course, of creating a psychologically safe environment. If you need creativity, again, a great example that if we have to pull ourselves out of this mess, or organizations will have to compete in the future, they can't compete on features anymore, because any commodity that you make, any product that you make is a commodity within 72 hours, depending on which industry you are in. Somebody else will copy it, someone else will make exactly the same thing, or maybe even better. You might use economies of scale and make the product better. So in terms of product features and benefits, there is very little that organizations can compete on. It's going to become in experience, the customer experience, or the creativity of the company in solving that problem, or the innovative way in which the company has differentiated itself. All these adjectives, creativity, innovation, vibrance, these all will happen only in a psychologically safe environment. You cannot make a person creative by threatening that person. Try doing it. Try telling a copywriter, buddy, in the next 1 hour, if you don't write a great copy, see what, I'll fire you. Do you think his or her copywriting, sort of inspiration is going to come with that? It will only come in an environment where they feel that they are psychologically safe. So from every which parameter, for the HR fraternity right now, to understand that possibly one of the most important things that they can contribute to a revival is not in terms of some optimization plan, but to actually advocate to their customers, which ironically are both the stakeholders of the organization leadership, because they are responsible for a bottom line, and also the employees, because they are responsible for taking money home to their families. And the HR fraternity sort of is the pathway between both of them. And there has to be a sense of reality that the HR person has, both from top and from bottom. But this, to my mind, is the occasion where the HR fraternity really has come to light. So I actually compared it very similar to maybe in about the late 90s, the CTO sort of came into being. Before that, there used to be only a GM IT. And GM IT was responsible for internet and mail, and you only looked, buddy, where is that GM IT, when the internet was not working. But when IT started becoming an enabler for organization, that role transformed into a chief technology officer who was responsible for leveraging technology for the company's strategy, to align the company's strategy or enable the company's strategy using technology. I think this is the time for the HR fraternity to step up and to align the organizational's HR cultural DNA into a DNA of an organization which can take on challenges which are ahead of us. Because like I was saying this morning, I was discussing with some people, this is like a boxing match in which both the boxers have been given a knockout punch and both have fallen down. Now, the boxer who will win this match will be decided by the one who gets up first at the count of 10. That is the situation for most organizations now, regardless of which field we are in. All of us have been given a knockout punch, and many of us, including, I mean, I know that some companies, which are IT companies and all, are right now, they are on the upswing because, digital, so there's a lot more work coming and all that. But frankly, we all know this, that when the water goes down, all the boats go down in the tide. It's not like some boat will be high and some boat will be low. When the water level goes down, all the boats go down, and when water tide rises up, all the boats rise. So Even economically, there may be some industries which will take a hit earlier, like the real estate, construction, tourism. These industries are taking a hit earlier, and some like pharma and IT are thinking that they're gaming, they think that entertainment industry, they think that they are doing well. They may be doing well right now, but as the tide of the economy goes down, pretty much every company will feel that sort of hit. So the points I wanted to sort of emphasize upon, which I hopefully covered in this discussion that I had with you, is firstly, disengaged teams cannot produce, they can't even do average job. They need to be engaged. Scared people cannot be engaged. So we need to create a psychological, an environment of psychological safety where people feel secure, people feel safe. To be able to do that, we need to have an environment where leaders themselves are vulnerable, where leaders are happy to exhibit their vulnerability. It's a great example, actually, if you think about it. If you look at the countries which had vulnerable leaders as their premiers, prime ministers or presidents, whatever. Again, I'm not going gender why. Vulnerability is not a prerogative of a male or a female. Those countries which went, whose leaders went and understood that empathy plays a very, one of them actually spoke to the school children. She realized that the school going children of my country would be apprehensive because what might be happening to their parents, to their grandparents and all of that. And the premier of that country decided to speak directly to the school children. Now, those countries which had an empathetic leader, they seem to have dealt with this crisis much, much, much better than countries which supposedly had very strong, alpha kind of leaders. So in a crisis, if we have to create an environment of psychological safety, we need leaders who are vulnerable. And the best way leaders can create an ambience of psychological safety, or the fact that vulnerability is okay, is to be vulnerable themselves, is to say, I don't know, I need help, I need advice on this. Do you have any idea how we might do this? These are the kind of sentences that encourage participative environment. Sentences like, I know it all, don't try to tell me, I've got a lot of experience, I've been there, done that. Very unlikely that those kind of leaders will get the participation that is required from the troops, from colleagues, from business partners, and several other areas. I have found, by the way, in the last 6 odd months working with several organizations, again, more as a fly on the wall, I have found some brilliant ideas that organizations have come up with. I'll give you one or two to illustrate the power of those ideas. One, for example, came from a real estate company in the NCR area. And this real estate company, as you know, most real estate companies, well before COVID, were running surplus inventory. So COVID only, sort of banged it much further down. The idea that during downturn, nobody is going to buy houses, nobody is going to make a capex purchase. But during downturns, one industry that will take off will be the education industry. And so therefore, to join one dot of surplus capacity, another dot of the need for education, and to say that these flats, which are surplus capacity and we are not able to sell, can we convert them into hostels? Because one of the big problems, and those of you from Pune would know this really well, is not the lack of universities. University might still be found, a seat might be found in college, but finding a good hostel or a safe hostel is a bigger problem in some of the cases. And to solve that problem by using surplus inventory, this actually came from a complete rank outsider to the real estate industry. It didn't come from an insider. So there are thousands of such ideas, where I'm coming from. And I think to be able to create that vulnerable leadership, vulnerable environment of psychological safety is, to my mind, going to be one of the biggest challenges. And organizations which have got the HR personnel who understand the importance of vulnerable leadership, or what I call gardener leaders, those who it's a very good metaphor to look at leadership. You had the authoritarian leadership style, which basically you join at the lowest level, and then as you rise up, become assistant manager, vice manager, then general manager, and then you, with white hair or with no hair, you are supposedly better than a person who's got black hair because you've seen everything. That's an authoritarian style, and it works. It works in certain industries, works in the bureaucracy, works in the armed forces, works in manufacturing, in certain places it does. In the 90s, So we had a different kind of leader. We had leadership style of coaching leaders, especially in the IT companies, where the founders of the company, they may have studied IT engineering of a completely different era, but they needed to coach people who could do the technologies of the current scenario. So I compare that kind of leadership with Ramakant Acharekar. Cricket fans might recognize him as the coach of one of the greatest batsmen who was ever created. Now, Ramakant himself played only one first-class test match in his entire life, but he went on to produce a player like Sachin Tendulkar. So that is the coaching kind of a leader. But the leadership that we'll require in the future times to come is much more of a vulnerable leader, of a gardener leader. And a gardener leader, I'm using this metaphor basically to illustrate a leader who understands that her job is to create an environment where plants will thrive. Her job is to provide adequate sunlight, to provide adequate nutrition, water, to keep distances between the plants so that they don't cover each other's growth, to make sure that you remove pests and insects that prevent the plants from growing. But very rarely will you see a gardener shouting at a cactus plant and comparing the cactus plant to a rose and saying, look at the rose. Rose has got so beautiful flowers. You cactus, you will be not promoted. That is not the way a gardener speaks, because a gardener understands that though a bamboo looks like a sugar cane, you cannot take juice out of a bamboo, and though a sugar cane looks like a bamboo, you cannot use it to build houses. So they know that each and every plant has a very different purpose and a very different nurturing cycle. And that is the kind of an ambience that will be required for pulling us out of this crisis. Now, I know it's going to be a difficult task for the HR, because the knee-jerk reaction of most alpha leaders in a crisis will be ready, fire, aim. That will be the way in which they'll think. I know, I've been there. Ready, fire, and then aim. So ready, everybody else, let's cut down call, but 20% cut karo, HO se headquarters se order aaya. Before that, that will give you a sense of doing a lot of activity. It won't solve the problem. The problem is much, much deeper. The problem is there is surplus capacity in the marketplace. The problem is there are more contenders who are going to fight for the same small resources. That requires your organization to do things completely differently, not to do the things you were doing earlier slightly better. Like, there is no point in using that Olympic mantra, higher, fighter, stronger, faster. Everybody is doing that. All companies are telling their sales teams that you need to do better. Instead of making 10 calls, you need to do 12 calls. Instead of working 10 hours, you need to work 12 hours. So that's really not going to solve the problem, because it is still the same. The resources out there are still limited and contenders are still more. I think companies will have to do something completely different. They'll have to reinvent themselves. And this is the range of, this is the environment of reinvention. A company called Zoom that you and I did not hear of 3 months or 6 months ago is today worth more than IBM. And a company called WeWork that you and I saw at every location has lost 3/4 of its valuation in 3 months' time. So in this chaotic environment where so much of churn is happening is the time where I think the HR professional can come to their true position which they deserve, moving away from the mechanistic payrolling and those kind of activities to much more as a strategic asset to the organization, not just to the CEO, but to the organization, and to lead with organizational morale as being the central pivot, rather than some antiseptic plan that comes, which is basically about cost cutting and all of that stuff. So these were the limited points that I wanted to share with you. I just want to see if I've left out any points. I think I've covered everything that I wanted to cover in this particular piece. There is one last piece that I wanted to share with you. This is as a result of a project that I'm doing with a company, and it was a great learning that came out of it, and I thought that I should share it with all of you because it will help everybody. Not connected with COVID, completely disconnected, but there's an organization I was working with which had a challenge of getting their leaders to sort of function together. The regular challenge. Everyone has got their egos and everyone has their this thing, and getting people of the same organization working together often is a bigger challenge than fighting the competition. Until we realized that these people, they don't really know each other. They work together with each other for years in some cases. And in most cases, they only knew each other's CV stories. Think about it for a second. Think about it in terms of, let's say you're working with a company. Think about how many people in your colleagues, in your organization know your real story. They know your CV story, your resume story. Studied in so-and-so place, went to this college, joined this company, opened so many branches, recruited so many people, all of the stories, embellished stories, which we write ourselves, about ourselves. Very rarely do we know each other's personal stories. We don't know how we cheated people, how we were cheated, how we were lied to, how we lied to people. We don't know whose heart we broke. Those are known only to our closest friends. In an organization, if we want to create a sense of camaraderie based on a purpose, then the best thing to do is to get each other to tell each other's real stories. How do you get your organization to be bonded together? The team members need to tell each other their real stories. You need to create that environment. Once that is done, I have found that the organization's morale, the organization's ability to take on any problem becomes exponentially stronger, because now you're fighting with a band of brothers. I'm using it gender neutral, but you're fighting with a team where you know people's real stories. So these are the 4-5 points I wanted to discuss. If there are any questions based on this, I'd be happy to sort of take them on. I think, time-wise, I'm generally on the timelines that we discussed. So I'll be happy to take on any questions if there are any.
Thank you so much. Friends, if you have any questions, please raise your hand so we will allow you to talk.
Or you can open the chat. If you open the chat.
Yeah, I will open the chat. No problem. I will do that.
Thoughts, questions, ideas, anything that you feel. If you open the chat, you can just.
So friends, if you have any question, please park that question in chat box, or you can raise your hand. So I will just allow you to speak. Okay, just hold on. Yes, sales training. I don't know what's your name, but you have raised your hand. Please go on with your question.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, dear.
Yeah. Thank you very much. My name is Jagmohan Singh Rishi. Sir, I'm a
just be louder, be louder.
Yeah. Just a minute. Okay. My name is Jagmohan Singh Rishi. I'm a great fan of you, sir. And my question is, you have mentioned a very good concept on partner leadership. My concern is that it is much easier said than done. Hello.
No, is that a question or a statement? It's easier said than done.
Yeah, easier said than done. My question is coming there, sir. That challenge with the organizations is that they don't look inwards. They normally look out towards the sales part. The focus is mostly over the bottom line and the top line, and not on the people. So I mean, how can we make the leaders aware? Okay, you have to become a gardener leader rather than the numbers leader only, and especially
how many people do you lead, Jagtap?
Jagmohan, sir. Jagmohan.
Sorry.
Yeah,
how many
I am into L&D and digital, and I have about 20 people, sir, in my team.
So why don't those 20 people's leader, that is you, become first aware? And you become first aware and you start implementing it amongst your 20. I think, we very often, I've been there also. Anything that I'm saying to you, by the way, I have done it myself. And that is why perhaps I know that. Very often we have been in situations where you say, isko na thoda samajhna chahiye, gardener leader kaisa hona chahiye isko. But frankly, we also have 20 people under us. If we can become a gardener leader for those 20 people, we are the gardener leader. If you put your hand to your heart and ask yourself this genuine question that out of this 20, how many do I really know? Do I really know if any one of them has got a special needs child? Do I really know if any one of them is divorced and trying to bring a child as a single parent? Do I really know if anyone is actually financially very, very badly off? We'll realize we actually don't know that. We don't know our people down to that level. We think we know them, but we don't know them. So we will treat 1 into 20 in one single template. All G level people as one, all F level people as one. We'll start. That's not the way human beings are. Every human being is a father, is a sister, is a, various different avatars we have. So I think it must begin with us. First point. Second point, I never said leadership is easy. So if somebody says, oh, but this is very difficult, easy, kisne bola? Kahan likha hai job description mein ki easy hai? Leadership is easy. Good leadership is actually quite difficult. It's not easy. Bad leadership is easy. But bad leadership doesn't survive for very long. And that is true for anything. No, it's true for good. To become a good doctor, it is difficult. To be a bad doctor, it's easy. So similarly, in any area, if you want to be a good professional in that area, it is difficult. So I don't think I'm talking about the degree of difficulty. What I'm saying is that usually when people will start behaving like that themselves under their own remit, you will find that it starts permeating. But to wish that, this defect, if my leader did not have, he would be a great leader. We are dealt the cards we are dealt. Just like we can't choose which families we are born into, usually we cannot also choose which leaders we have. Especially in these times, we cannot. So I'll just look at some of the questions that people have sent here.
Thank you, sir.
Kanchan
Just
is
one
asked a very
comment.
good question. Sorry?
Just one comment. Wish we have leaders in political parties also like yours, sir. Thank you.
Thanks, Satan. Thank you so much. Kanchan is asked, is sharing personal stories a really good option? It might turn into people taking disadvantage. So obviously you mean people taking advantage if they come to know of your personal story. I don't think so. I mean, I'm not saying that you should tell people that I went to jail when I was in class 12 or something like that. That's not what I'm saying, but I hope you didn't. But if you feel vulnerable about something, if you feel uncertain about something, if you feel insecure about something, or if you feel you don't know something, it's okay to be absolutely candid and to say that. I found it's quite refreshing in meetings. So, I have changed a lot of my companies and domains. I've been in IT, in automotive, and my last assignment, I was in a company that had refining, retail, and telecom together. And every industry, as you are aware, has got a lot of jargons, 3-letter alphabets that are jargons of that industry. And since I was new to the oil and gas industry, and since I have learning disabilities, I can't remember jargons, I can't remember phone numbers, I definitely cannot remember data. I would ask the full form of these acronyms again and again in meetings. The same meeting, I may ask the same acronym 2 or 3 times. And I was actually quite bewildered to see that in that room, maybe 40, 45 people sitting, many of them are supposedly veterans, who would not know the full form of that. And they would never ask, because if they asked, it would feel a little demeaning to them. But fact is that many people in the room didn't know. So I think sharing, I wouldn't say ignorance, but sharing apprehension, sharing approaches, sharing a framework that I think this is one way to do it. What do you think? Asking for counsel. These are all ways of showing vulnerability. It doesn't have to be some deep down secret of yours that you need to share with everybody. But if you share who you are, see, one of the things is that you can never fool troops. That's for sure. If in case you are thinking that by any act that you put on, you are able to make your people believe that you are someone different from who you are, that ain't happening. That's for sure. Who do you discuss 90% of the time? Your boss. Similarly, people who report to you discuss you for 90% of the time. So all the time they're talking about you, watching you, observing you, seeing what you do, seeing what you don't do, seeing your body language change when you're talking to the boss, seeing your body language change when you're talking to a subordinate, seeing the delta between how you treat a senior and a junior. They're watching you all the time. So there is no way you can kid them anyway. Might as well throw open the door and say, this is who I am and these are my vulnerabilities. That's what I meant by sharing personal stories. So that is one. Psychologically safe environment is mostly in government organizations, but very few. Actually, no. Psychologically safe environment is not what you think. That you are thinking a job-wise safe environment. कि नौकरी से कोई नहीं निकालेगा. That is not psychologically safe. नौकरी से तो चपरासी को भी कोई नहीं निकालता. But do you think a chaprasi who is treated every day, बड़ी come here, go there, that is a psychologically safe environment? I don't mean psychologically safe means job-wise safe. I'm sorry to use the chaprasi example. It can happen to anybody. Anybody can be treated that way. The point I'm making is that a person needs to feel relevant in the organization. A person needs to feel that if I come to the workplace and I contribute something, there is a difference in the end product. If a person feels that I'm a widget, I'm one tiny brick in the entire scheme of things, whether I'm there, not there, dead, alive, nothing really makes a difference. I have no relevance. There's so many layers between me and the end product that are going. These are the things which disengage people. People start losing connections. They start losing connections with a sense of purpose, with a sense of relevance. They start losing those connections. And when they start losing connections, they stop getting engaged. So what I meant by psychologically safe environment is not job-wise psychologically safe environment. It's ironic if you use that comparison. By that logic, anybody who's working in the army should be in the most unsafe place, because the army you can die. That is not the point. Army is one of the most psychologically safe environments, because you know that if I have got any problem, anything to worry about, there's be someone to look after my family, someone will watch my back. So it's not about job safety, it is about psychological safety. It's a big difference. So I think you are right in saying that the basic question I have is on the topic itself. So your basic doubt needs to be cleared at the topic itself. Psychological safety and job safety are two separate things. They're not the same thing. How new HR aspirants can become a part of this new challenging job responsibility in the various organizations, especially in IT? Big question. I think HR aspirants, if you really do one mantra, which is true for every line manager, not just for the HR, but if the HR just remembers one line mantra, that your job is to advocate the voice of the team, not advocate the voice of the boss to the team. That the boss can do himself or herself. The people usually cannot do it to the boss, and that is why. So I'm not talking about a union leader, not it is much more to say that evaluate the efficiency of a charged up team and a vibrant team, and say, if you give me 10 people who are charged up and vibrant, then so I'll tell you one of the fundamental areas where we often go wrong. I'm sure all of us must have done that question in algebra or in mathematics, wherever in school, that if 8 men take 4 days to dig a hole that is 20 feet deep, how many men will take to dig the hole in 2 days? Some such shit. We must have done that. Often I used to think, the answer should be, it depends on the men. Depends totally on the men, their mood, their chutzpah, their vibrance. So of course, I'm giving that as an anecdote. But advocating that position to the leadership, that the moment you will say, we are going to cut down 30% of the jobs, what it will do to the remaining 70%? Will the remaining 70% be able to give even 10% of their mind share to the remaining, so that advocacy is what an HR aspirant needs to do. And the only way you can do that is to actually get to know the people for whom you're doing advocacy really, really well, right down to their personal level. If you know them to that level, you will be able to do your job, to my mind, really well. But like I said, it's not true just for HR, it's true for all leaders. What would be the ways to provide psychological safety when the company is losing business and has no option but to cut costs? So I am not saying for a moment that you have to kid the people. I think all of us have, those of us who have come from families which had modest resources, we have had chats where our fathers have one day sat down everybody and told that, listen, this month is going to be tough, or this is going to be a situation, and all that. That's all we need. I think that's all the team needs. Team needs the leader to be honest and say, yes, I think we will have to cut jobs. We'll have to figure out a way. We will be as fair as possible. We will try to ensure to spread the poverty as much as we can. And in case we do have to let go of people, we'll try and do it in the fairest way possible. And as soon as the company recovers, we'll ensure that those people are the ones who will get the first right of refusal to be onboarded back again. Making this candid confession is usually far better than giving some sulu gulu that, no job cuts will happen. Headquarters has told me this and that. Recently, I was doing an intervention for a company, and the CHRO very violently jumped up and said, no, in our company, there are no layoffs that are happening. Our APAC CEO has ensured, he has assured us no layoffs will happen. I think 2 weeks later, 2 or 3 weeks later, the APAC CEO was fired. So in that environment, to kid around people and say, everybody knows in this environment today, it's not you who is deciding that jobs have to be cut. You're getting instructions from top. You'll have to do it. I think it's fair to tell the people what you know. You tell them the truth. Say we are trying to handle it the best. That in itself is providing some. It's like, suppose you had a loved one who was inside the operating theater. The doctor kept coming out and going back in. You ask the doctor what is that. The doctor won't even look at you. Just go straight in, look at you and we'll tell you. Let us do our job. Vis-a-vis the doctor coming and saying, this is what we have done. So far, this has happened. Everything seems to be okay from our side. Everything has happened. We will see how it goes. I'll keep you updated. Which kind of a doctor would you like? Which kind of leader would you like? Which kind of leader would you want to be? It's as simple as that. The answer is there in front of us. We don't need somebody rocket science and all of that too. The answer is right there. What do you think is important as an employee to help our organization come out of the crisis better? All the things that I just said, all of them are important. You have morale of the employees, but generally it is the monetary benefit which rises the, yeah, that's good. But company's target is to cut the cost. So I'll read out this question, a good question. You rightly said that the morale of the employee should be raised, but generally it is the monetary benefits which raises the morale, as they say. But company's target is to cut the cost. How to cope with this situation where there's a deduction in salary beside no appraisal? So I think everything in life becomes relative, no? So in an environment where everyone is getting, so I'll tell you this story, fascinating story. Many years ago when there was a time when the actual raise letters, not raise, but the increment letters used to be handed over by the CEO. So I would call my senior most guys and, have a chat with them, discuss about last year and give us. So I remember one guy had given him and he got it was a good year. So he got almost like a 22-23% raise. He went away very happy. He wasn't expecting it. Very happy, very grinning year to year. After 1 hour, he came back totally angry and crying. Why? Because somebody else got 28%. इससे 3% ज़्यादा मिल गया उसको. Totally upset. Now, it's a funny thing. I asked him, कि इसके घर पर से तेरे घर में राशन आता है क्या? मतलब, is there any money flow that his income comes to your house or your income goes to his house? He is a different individual, different wife, different kid, handling a different thing with his salary. You are handling with your salary. You got 23% more than what you used to get earlier. You were very happy until you discovered that he's got 28. Now you are unhappy. So this is human nature. Human nature is completely relative. So for a person who is unhappy in a certain year because they did not get a raise and did not get appraisal, if that year is a year when 30% of the team has been asked to leave, then just having a job is a great advantage. Just retaining that job is a great advantage. And you know that most people right now, if they have a job, they are lucky. And that is why many organizations are suo moto cutting salaries by 30%, 40%. Rich organizations, big organizations are cutting suo moto because they know that there is no option that the people have. So I think the relativity also changes. It changes from time to time. And at this point of time, I know that there will be deduction in salaries. It's a requirement of the bottom line, safeguarding the bottom line and all. And of course, capitalist employers will take advantage of the fact that right now it's a buyer's market as far as talent is concerned. There is a huge abundance of talent in the market and it is a buyer's market. So they will take advantage of it. So these are realities of life. It's happened the other way also, especially in the IT industry. If you remember, there used to be a time when IT skill was so sought after that people were skipping jobs every 2 years and making jumps. It happened. This will also happen. So I think these are all ups and downs of the industry. Leadership traits which we must focus on these kind of situations. I spoke about the leadership traits. A vulnerable leader, a leader who creates more of a gardener kind of a leader rather than an authoritarian leader. Empathetic leadership. Can you throw light on empathetic leadership and vulnerable leadership? I think people are much more concerned about others' behavior, but are paying very less or negligible time on self-development. So to request you to put some energetic punch that will help us to keep ourselves aligned to self. I think leaders have to develop themselves every day. I don't know where people have got this notion that leadership is something to do with your appointment. And once you're appointed as a vice president, then you become a vice president, and you're appointed as a president, you become a president. I think you're constantly learning leadership. It's constantly learning that, okay, oh, I did it that way. That day it worked, but today it did not work, but the situation changed because the person was different. That day I said something, it boosted a person. Today I said the same thing, it demoralized a person because the situation was different and the individual was different. I think these kind of conversations, self-correcting conversations, have to keep on happening on a daily basis with ourselves. So long as we realize that becoming a leader, I'm not even saying it from a stature, but becoming a leader is a constant process that you have to keep on doing. It doesn't end. It doesn't stop just because you have got promoted to a certain rank. It has to continuously keep on happening. I think you will be focused on self-development. That's one. Second, I always advocate that we have to be curious. Anything, if you're sitting anywhere, you see anybody, ask that person, kaisa karta hai, kitna kaam karta hai, kitna dhanda hota hai, tum kitna bana leta hai mahine ka, to get a sense of that person. How is that person thinking? What is that person doing? How is he, how is he kind of, how is that individual thinking? That sense of curiosity. And the third, I always advocate you should try and read as much as possible. And by read, I don't mean reading some very LinkedIn article. Read proper books. Read books on psychology. Read books on leadership. Read books on organizational, people who have created organization, not textbook, but people who have created organization. Read about Disney. Read about Steve Jobs. We learn a lot by reading other people's stories. It's essentially you are going through the 20-30 year life of a leader and watching what that leader did, almost like having a personal mentor. So reading is another area which I would strongly recommend as a there are many more questions. Some of them are repeats of the stuff that you said. Scared people can't get engaged. How come military people are self-engaged person? Everyone is scared. Even military personnel are scared. It's not that they're not scared. When we go into operations, we know what can happen. But we are also confident that as an organization, we'll be able to tackle that fear. Maybe not as an individual, but as a team with everyone together. So if I get wounded, I will be carried back. They will not leave me there. That belief is instilled in me because culturally it has been. We will leave no man behind. That mantra has been not just fed, but proven to us time and time again. It has, people have risked more lives to recover the dead body of their colleagues. And that tradition ensures that no matter what happens, I will be brought back home, dead or alive. So you create that sense of assurances in your team also. And that can also happen even in the civilian teams, to tell people that, listen, we will not lay off people. We will take, if need be, everyone will take a 50% cut. But we will not lay off people. It's a bold statement to make. Some companies have made that statement. Some leaders have made that statement, and they're making it happen. They're honoring that. They're making it happen. Right. So I think we are now 1 hour up from our discussion. I know there are many, many more questions. Can you suggest some self-development books? I would recommend all of us to read the first 90 days. Don't be misled by the title of that book. The title of the book indicates that it is meant for a new leader and the first 90 days. But I think that's a very powerful book because it's a framework of how do you measure your own leadership quotient. What is it that you need to learn? What is it that you need to set your expectation? I think it's written by Michael Watkins, if I'm not wrong. Watkins is the last name. First 90 days. Read that. It will help you a lot. I think HR professionals will be helped a lot by that book. Many more questions, but thanks a ton for this amazing opportunity to speak with you. I see most of you are still there. So great meeting with you, and hope to sort of interact with you once again as soon as possible. Shankar, back to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much for this wonderful inputs, insights. On behalf of Vibrant HR, now I would like to invite Sudhir Patil to sum up the session and just convey our vote of thanks to all the people.
One other thing, Shankar, I just wanted to say that usually, what happens is after these questions, I look at them and, I probably respond to a lot of them on Twitter, because in Twitter, then it becomes easier for people to see. So those of you who like can follow me. It's Capt Raman. And then I'll just type it out so you can see it.
Okay.
That's my Twitter handle. So if you follow me on Twitter or go to my website, it has some articles on exactly the situation that we are going through. That might help you. There you go.
Yeah. Shankar, thank you very much for introducing me here. And Captain Raghu Ramanji, I'm really very thankful and really enlightened with the real experience shared in very simple words. To extend, I also have experienced similar kind of thing during my throughout career of 25 years. And as you really started from behavioral aspect, that means Maslow theory, where we started, and risk and security, where we touched upon scarcity, afraid people, or the fear factor in the organization. From there, we turned around to the leadership and particularly responding in crisis condition here, where you have really figured out the fact that knowing team, that means having accurate picture of the team, where most of leaders, they really miss out things, knowing their strength, knowing their weaknesses, or knowing their threats, or probably where people really can leverage the capability, people really miss out. And when we talked upon empowerment, at times I have also came across that people are empowered, but they themselves don't feel that empowerment with them. So feeling that empowerment is equally important to every individual or a professional. Specifically here, I'll say every HR person should feel empowered and then respond to a situation and then take lead to overcome the situation, where demographics of a team members, as you rightly figured out, name, everything, every particular details of the person. I still remember my earlier chairman and managing director used to call each and every person by name and everything. So they used to know about their kid, family members, everything, and I used to get surprised at times. But this is the truth, that knowing demography of a teammates is equally important here. And considering you are one of the contributor to the organization, which is very important to bring that kind of leadership across the organization. Of course, this everything happens with the change which is required based on time. And with these few things where you have really I have noted it as a step 1, step 0, step 2, step 3, likewise accurate picture of a organization in crisis is very important. Second point, which I have noted as psychological safe environment. So creating that kind of environment, which is equally important than having its plan, that purpose driven plan, that too by involvement of people, that is very important here. Execution with flexibility for spot decision making, where high degree of empowerment, which you touched upon, which is important. And towards ahead, that near miss, which you have really mentioned there. Many times near miss capturing mechanism of near miss is missing in many of the organization, and we talk something else, where capturing mechanism of near miss is really important for us. And this takes us to leveraging our leadership capability to bring our organization to a level. I mean, these are certain points and takeaway for me as an individual. So towards the conclusion, Shankar, thank you very much for arranging this session for all of us. That to great person like Captain Raghu Ramanji, who has a rich experience in private as well as defense, I will say, which really means a lot to all of us. And I am really thankful to Shadul for making this everything instrumental, and also to Anaga Singh, who has introduced beautifully. So thank you very much to each and every individual who has contributed, participated in this, and to all members who have raised their questions, queries to enlighten everyone's knowledge. So thank you very much on the behalf of Vibrant HR, to all of the participants, and specifically Captain Raghu Ramanji for making your time for all of us here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very
Thank you.
much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Shankar. Over to you.
Thank you so much.